In this video, I will clarify the story of the motion picture Solitary Ranger. Like Speed Racer and John Carter sometime recently, The Solitary Officer could be a motion picture with no voting demographic to talk of. It's a huge picture with a klutzy, profoundly uncool Saint Army pound of the social arrange, based on a property that most youthful watchers do not know or care almost. It arrives in theaters recolored by prattle of filmmaker versus studio budget wars, and concerns that its star and co-executive maker, Johnny Depp, would play the Ranger's friend and sole direct, Tonto, as a local American Stepin Fetchit, faltering around in face paint and a dead crow tiara. The film's beloved picture might as well have been a target. As well terrible, for all its erroneous conclusions, typically an individual picture, savage and sweet, intelligent and silly. It's as over-the-top and domineering as Steven Spielberg's 1941, and, all wagered, as likely to be re-evaluated 20 a long time from presently, and depicted as misapprehended. This time out, Tonto doesn't live to serve the conceal man. He's a meandering soul on his mission of equity, baffled and driven frantic by torment he persevered decades prior. The officer, whose birth title is John Reed, has gone west to connect his Texas officer brother, James Identification Dale, who's in each other blockbuster these days. Reed meets Tonto shackled on a prepare with the awful band Butch Cavendish, William Fichtner, who get away, joins up with his ancient band group, and wreaks ruin on Reed, Tonto and the domain, but not in a vacuum. Butch may be a scoffing, scar-faced twisted person who eats human tissue. Tonto alludes to him as Wendigo, says he's driven life out of a just a la the coin a Scatsy poster's catchphrase, and carries a silver bullet to put him down, but in time we see that the ban is an expression of the American ID. Just like the railroad aristocrat, Tom Wilkinson, that he subtly serves, Butch communicates the will of the lion's share, indeed in spite of the fact that the kindlier individuals of the lion's share abhor to think of themselves in such troublesome terms. The film depicts its setting as a PG-13 form of Sergio Leone and Clint Eastwood's every man for himself hellscape. Aloud, this has been the Western's default worldview since the 70s, but it's still startling to see it connected to The Solitary Officer. This myth is naturally square, adjusted to gotten shrewdness almost who runs the nation and why it's a firm. The character attempted emigrate from the 1950s little screen to theaters in 1981 and fizzled, not fair since the motion picture was powerless, but since 7 a long time after Watergate and 6 a long time after the drop of Saigon, the idea of a destitute individual of color giving himself to a middle-class white male savior didn't make sense any longer, in the event that undoubtedly it ever did. Intriguingly, there's proof that the real-life premise for The Officer was a dark man. How do you adjust The Officer for multicultural, post-9/11, post-financial meltdown America? That's the address. The producers hook with it amusingly, and toss in large-scale activity, wide droll and black comedy exchange, whereas they're at it. The joined together state's armed force. Reed shouts at one point. At last, somebody who'll tune in to reason. Fortunately, The Solitary Officer is more than the whole of its references, since Verbinski and his screenwriters wind them around the center of a vision. Usually a story approximately national myths, why they're sustained, who benefits. As we observe this story unfurl, we're not seeing reality, but a shaggy, colorful counter-myth, told by a small enormous man-looking elderly Tonto to a white boy at an ancient West museum in 1933 San Francisco. Ancient Tonto could be a respectable savage in a glass case, encompassed by a landmark valley diorama whose color and surface get ready us for the CGI-infused storybook scenes of the film itself. Tonto needs to halt that boy from gulping the official adaptation of how the West was won, and from reflexively trusting specialist of any kind, ever. All the ancient Western signifiers are flipped. A U.S. armed force activity on sake of a organization is so negative that the gathering of people implores for Indians to ride to the protect. The film is so adjusted to Tonto's trouble that when a brass band plays Stars and Stripes until the end of time, it's awful fellow music, as chilling as the German national song of devotion in a World War II flick. 8. This solitary officer may be a better than average man from the begin, but he's serving degenerate experts, without knowing it. By the conclusion, his values are that of a brawny 1960s extremist who demands that the expressed values of America are extraordinary, but we haven't lived up to them. As film fault finder Walter Chaw put it, this movie's a labor of ardor for a character so extraordinarily square that he gets to be typical of our dissatisfaction in ourselves. By the conclusion, the officer has ended up something near to an American Robin Hood, an outlaw by circumstance who gets at the distinction between brute constraint and genuine ethical specialist. That such concepts are being supported by a $200 million Walt Disney tentpole picture will appear either hypocritical or inspiring, depending on whether you just like the motion picture. Either way, typically an uneven bubblegum blockbuster with a sharp delayed flavor impression, overlong but astonishing, built of borrowed bits however disobediently its claim thing.